Okay, so we are going to read a story together. It's called The Short Happy Life of Francis Macomber. It was written by Ernest Hemingway. And if you watched the Note video, you know his views on men and masculinity. And I think we're going to see a little bit of that demonstrated here. So without further ado, The Short Happy Life of Francis Macomber. So we're going to break this up over a couple of lessons because it's a long story. So let's get to reading. And as always, we are going to annotate as we read. So, classic sign of Hemingway's writing. It starts in medias res, or in the middle of things, and we are dropped into the middle of a safari expedition. Francis Macomber, a wealthy American, is on safari in Africa with his wife Margot. And they're being led by Wilson, Robert Wilson, who is an Australian who works as a hunting tour guide for wealthy Americans. And a very eventful afternoon just occurred. Let's learn about it. Starting here. It was now lunchtime, and they were all sitting under the double green fly of the dining tent, pretending nothing had happened. So right here, we can see from the get, he's giving us something. Obviously, something happened. Will you have lime juice or lemon squash? Macomber asked. I'll have a gimlet, Robert Wilson told him. I'll have a gimlet too. I need something, Margot, Macomber's wife said. Well, I suppose it's the thing to do, Macomber agreed. Tell him to make 3 gimlets. The mess boy had started them already, lifting the bottles out of the canvas cooling bags that sweated wet in the wind that blew through the trees that shaded the tents. What had I ought to give him? Macomber asked. A quid would be plenty, Wilson told him. You don't want to spoil him. Will the head man distribute it? Absolutely. Francis Macomber had, half an hour before, been carried to his tent from the edge of camp in triumph on the arms and shoulders of the cook, the personal boys, the skinners, and the porters. The gun-bearers had taken no part in the demonstration. So this right here, if I can get my pen to work, should tell us something is up. When the native boys put him down at the door of his tent, he had shaken all their hands, received their congratulations, and then gone into the tent and sat on the bed beside his wife. And sat in the tent on the bed until his wife came in. She did not speak to him when she came in, and he left the tent at once to wash his face and hands in the portable wash basin outside, and go over to the dining tent to sit in a comfortable canvas chair in the breeze in the shade. You got your lion, Robert Wilson said to him, and a damn fine one, too. Mrs. Macomber looked at Wilson quickly. She was an extremely handsome and well-kept woman, of the beauty and social position which had, 5 years before, commanded $5,000 as the price of endorsing with photographs a beauty product which she had never used. She had been married to Francis Macomber for 11 years. So Margot, if you look at this whole kind of a thing here, basically, she's a rich socialite who, like any number of social media influencers today, at the time in the 1920s when the story took place, was hired to be the face of a product. He's a good lion, isn't he? Macomber said. His wife looked at him now. She looked at both men as though she had never seen them before. The one, Wilson, the white hunter, she knew she had never truly seen before. He was about middle height, with sandy hair, a stubby mustache, a very red face, and extremely cold blue eyes, with faint white wrinkles at the corners, that grooved merrily when he smiled. He smiled at her now, and she looked away from his face at the way his shoulders sloped in the loose tunic he wore, with the 4 big cartridges held in loops where the left breast pocket should have been, at his big brown hands, his old slacks, his very dirty boots, and back to his red face again. She noticed where the baked red of his face stopped in a white line that marked the circle left by his Stetson hat that hung now from one of those pegs of the tent pole. So this description of Macomber here, if you look at pictures of Hemingway at the time, is basically a description of himself. "Here's to the lion," Robert Wilson said. He smiled at her again, and, not smiling, she looked curiously at her husband. Francis Macomber was very tall, very well built if you did not mind that length of bone. Dark, his hair cropped like an oarsman, rather thin-lipped, and was considered handsome. He was dressed in the same sort of safari clothes that Wilson wore, except that his were new. He was 35 years old, kept himself very fit, was good at court games, had a number of big game fishing records, and had just shown himself very publicly to be a coward. So, this is what happened. We don't know the details yet, but this cowardice, it's a big deal. Starting here. "Here's to the lion," he said. "I can't ever thank you for what you did." Margot, his wife, looked away from him and back to Wilson. "Let's not talk about the lion," she said. Wilson looked over at her without smiling, and now she smiled at him. "It's been a very strange day," she said. "Hadn't you ought to put your hat on even under the canvas at noon? You told me that, you know." "Might put it on," said Wilson. "You know you have a very red face, Mr. Wilson," she told him and smiled again. "Drink," said Wilson. "I don't think so," she said. "Francis drinks a great deal, but his face is never red." "It's red today," Macomber tried to joke. "No," said Margot. "It's mine that's red today. But Mr. Wilson's is always red." "Must be racial," said Wilson. "I say, you wouldn't like to drop me beauty as a topic, would you?" "But I've just started on it." "Let's chuck it," said Wilson. "Conversation is going to be so difficult," Margot said. "Don't be silly, Margot," her husband said. "No difficulty," Wilson said. "Got a damn fine lion." Margot looked at them both, and they both saw that she was going to cry. Wilson had seen it coming for a long time, and he dreaded it. Macomber was past dreading it. "I wish it hadn't happened. Oh, I wish it hadn't happened," she said, and she started for the tent. She made no noise of crying, but they could see that her shoulders were shaking under the rose-colored, sun-proof shirt that she wore. "Women upset," said Wilson to the tall man. "Amounts to nothing. Strain on the nerves in one thing or another." "No," said Macomber. "I suppose I rate for that for the rest of my life now." "Nonsense. Let's have a spot for the giant killer," said Wilson. "If you get the whole thing. Nothing to it anyway." "We might try," said Macomber. "I won't forget what you did for me, though." "Nothing," said Wilson. "All nonsense." And so they sat there in the shade where the camp was pitched, under some wide-topped acacia trees, with the boulder-strewn cliff behind them, and a stretch of grass that ran to the bank of a boulder-filled stream in front of the forest beyond it. And they drank their just cool lime drinks and avoided one another's eyes. Well, the boys all knew about it now, and when he saw Macomber's personal boy looking curiously at his master while he was putting dishes on the table, Wilson snapped at him in Swahili. The boy turned away with his face blank. "What were you telling him?" Macomber asked. "Nothing. Told him to look alive, or I'd say he'd got about 15 at the best." "What's that, lashes?" "It's quite illegal," Wilson said. "You're supposed to find them." "Do you still have them whipped?" "Oh, yeah. They could raise a row if they choose to complain, but they don't. They prefer it to the fines." "How strange," said Macomber. "Not strange, really," Wilson said. "Which would you rather do? Take a good batching or lose your pay?" And then he felt embarrassed at asking it, and before Macomber could answer, he went on. "We all take a beating every day, you know, one way or another." That was no better. Good God, he thought, am I a diplomat, aren't I? "Yeah, we take a beating," said Macomber, still not looking at him. "I'm awfully sorry about that lion business. It doesn't have to go any further, does it? I mean, no one will hear about it, will they?" "You mean will I tell it at the Mathaga Club?" Wilson looked at him coldly now. He had not expected this. So he's a bloody four-letter man as well as a bloody coward, he thought. I rather liked him until today. But how is one to know about an American? "Nah," said Wilson. "I'm a professional hunter. We never talk about our clients. You can be quite easy on that. It's supposed to be bad form not to ask us not to talk, though." He had decided now that to break would be much easier. He would eat then by himself, and he could read a book with his meals. They would eat by themselves. He would see them through the safari on a very formal basis. What was it the French called it? Distinguished consideration. And it would be a damn sight easier than having to go through this emotional trash. He would insult him and make a good clean break. And then he could read a book with his meals, and he'd still be drinking their whiskey. That was a phrase for it when a safari went bad. You ran into another white hunter and you asked, "How's everything going?" And he answered, "Oh, I'm still drinking their whiskey," and you knew that everything had gone to pot. "I'm sorry," Macomber said, and looked at him with his American face that would stay adolescent until it became middle-aged. And Wilson noted his crew-cropped hair, fine eyes, only faintly shifty, good nose, thin lips, and handsome jaw. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize that. There's lots of things I don't know." But what could he do, Wilson thought. He was all ready to break it off quickly and neatly, and here the beggar was apologizing after he had just insulted him. He made one more attempt. "Don't worry about me talking," he said. "I've a living to make. You know, in Africa, no woman ever misses her lion, no white man ever bolts." "I bolted like a rabbit," Macomber said. "Now here, you have it." Looks like Macomber ran away from the hunt. Now what in hell were you going to do about a man who talked like that, Wilson thought. Wilson looked at Macomber with his flat blue machine gunner's eyes, and the other smiled back at him. He had a pleasant smile, if you did not notice how his eyes showed when he was hurt. Right here, it doesn't sound like a Hemingway hero to me. "Maybe I can fix it up on Buffalo," he said. "We're after them next, aren't we?" "In the morning, if you like," Wilson told him. Perhaps he had been wrong. This was certainly the way to take it. You most certainly could not tell a damned thing about an American. He was all for Macomber again, if you could forget that morning. But of course you couldn't. The morning had been about as bad as they come. Yikes. Sounds like it was pretty bad. Here comes the Mem Sahib. Mem Sahib means woman. She was walking over from her tent, looking refreshed and cheerful and quite lovely. She had a very perfect oval face, so perfect that you expected her to be stupid. But she wasn't stupid. Wilson thought, no, not stupid. "How is the beautiful red-faced Mr. Wilson? Are you feeling better, Francis, my pearl?" "Oh, much," said Macomber. "I've dropped the whole thing," she said, sitting down at the table. "What importance is there whether or not Francis is any good at killing lions? It's not his trade. That's Mr. Wilson's trade. Mr. Wilson is really very impressive killing anything. You do kill anything, don't you?" "Oh, anything," said Wilson. "Simply anything." They are, he thought, the hardest in the world. The hardest, the cruelest, the most predatory, and the most attractive, and their men has softened or gone to pieces nervously as they have hardened. Or is it that they pick men that they can handle? They can't know that much at the age that they marry, he thought. He was grateful that he had gone through his education on American women before now, because this was a very attractive one. "We're going after Buff in the morning," he told her. "I'm coming." "No, you're not." "Oh, yes, I am. Mayn't I, Francis?" "Why not stay in camp?" "Not for anything," she said. "I wouldn't miss something like today for anything." So here, she's obviously poking fun at her husband. He, as we know, ran off like a coward from whatever. Seems to me like she witnessed it, and she's aching to see him make a fool of himself again. Doesn't sound like a very healthy marriage. When she left, Wilson was thinking, when she went off to cry, she seemed a hell of a fine woman. She seemed to understand, to realize, to be hurt to him and for herself, and to know how things really stood. She's away for 20 minutes, and now she is back, simply enameled in that American female cruelty. They are the damnedest women. Really the damnedest. "Well, we'll put on another show for you tomorrow," Francis Macomber said. "You're not coming," Wilson said. "You're very mistaken," she told him. "And I want to see you perform again. You were lovely this morning. That is, if blowing things' heads off is lovely." Here's the lunch, said Wilson. You're very merry, aren't you? Why not? I didn't come out here to be dull. Well, it hasn't been dull, Wilson said. He could see the boulders in the river and the high bank beyond, with the trees, and he remembered the morning. Oh, no, she said. It's been charming. And tomorrow? Oh, you don't know how I've been looking forward to tomorrow. That's a land he's offering you, Wilson said. They're the big cowy things that jump like hares, aren't they? I suppose that describes them, Wilson said. It's very good meat, Macomber said. Yeah. They're not dangerous, are they? Only if they fall on you, Wilson told her. I'm so glad. Why not let up in the bitchery just a little bit, Margot? Macomber said, cutting the eland steak and putting some mashed potato gravy and carrot on the downturned fork that tinged through the piece of meat. Well, I suppose I could, she said, since you put it so prettily. Tonight we'll have champagne for the lion, Wilson said. It's a bit too hot at noon. Oh, the lion, Margot said. I'd forgotten the lion. So this is actually where we're going to stop for today. We can already see some characterization being built up. Margot seems to take pleasure in the fact that her husband made a fool of himself. Macomber seems a little bit beaten and downtrodden. Wilson trying to deal with the whole mess. And we'll pick this up tomorrow as we continue reading the story.